Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As we start out, I have two simple requests. One, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And two, whenever you're shopping for parts and gear, please use my affiliate links. I really appreciate that. All right, this is the 2024 BMW F800GS, and this is the more affordable, more highway-oriented version of BMW's new F900GS. Now, if this looks eerily similar to the F750GS I reviewed 2 or 3 years ago, that's because basically what BMW did was they took the F750GS, put in the updated larger engine, and renamed it the F800GS. Since the average adventure bike buyer rarely does any serious off-roading, whether they want to admit to that or not, do you really need the higher spec, more expensive F900GS, or can you get away with the smaller, lower to the ground, more affordable F800GS? Also, does this F800GS really offer anything compelling over more affordably priced rivals like the Honda Transalp 750, or are you just paying for the BMW badge? Also, very important to note that my test bike here is the low suspension version of the F800GS. It's also equipped with an extra low OEM seat. What that means is that the seat height of this bike is exceptionally low for an adventure motorcycle. It's under 30 inches or under 760 millimeters. So the question is this the bike and the setup you should be looking at if you're a shorter adventure rider? Let's jump into the in-depth review on the F800GS to find out if this motorcycle is worth buying. All right, I have a simple question for you as we start out. If you have owned a BMW motorcycle, how was your ownership experience? I'm really curious to know, and let's have a discussion about that in the comments section below. All right, let's delve into the specs and features on the F800GS. The base price of this bike is $10,900 US, but if you add the premium package, which this bike has, that adds around $2,000, and that adds the things that you kind of expect to already be here, like cruise control, quick shifter, riding modes, and things like that. So as tested, without the destination or freight fee, this bike comes in around $12,800 as you see it here. The wet weight of this bike, fully fueled up, ready to ride, is 500 pounds or 227 kilograms. The fuel capacity of this bike is 4 gallons, and I will convert that into liters here on the screen. The engine on this bike, so it does get the larger 895cc parallel twin engine from the F900GS, but it has different tuning for less horsepower, but it has similar torque to the 900GS. Now, some notes about the naming convention that BMW uses and the engine size. In typical BMW fashion, they do this with cars, they do it with bikes. The name on the side of the bike doesn't necessarily correspond to the engine size. So the F750GS was actually an 850. This bike that they call the 800GS is actually a 900. So if that's not confusing, I don't know what is. Now, in terms of power output, you have 87 horsepower now on this model versus 77 horsepower, so 10 more horsepower versus the outgoing F750GS. Torque also went up from 61 pound-feet to 67 pound-feet, or from 83 to 90 Newton-meters. So nice improvement there in power and torque. Now the compression ratio on these engines is a little bit high, 13.1 to 1, and that does mean that you're going to need to run premium fuel on this motorcycle. The transmission on this bike is a 6-speed. It does have a slip assist clutch. You have an optional quick shifter, which this bike has, and of course you have a chain final drive. Suspension travel on the 800GS, the standard suspension travel would be 6.6 inches or 170 millimeters, but this is the low suspension model, meaning this bike is dropped down to 5.9 inches or 150 millimeters of suspension travel front and back. Now you can see right off the bat that this is a very different suspension than the upside down long travel suspension you get on the F900GS. The only adjustments you have on this suspension, you do have a rear adjustment for rebound damping, and you do have a rear preload adjustment, which you can see right there. Now, you can get optional electronic suspension adjustment, or BMW ESA as they call it, and that would give you electronic control via the handlebar of damping and rear preload. Now this test bike doesn't have it, but it's a $400 option, and if you're getting one of these, I would highly recommend you try to get a bike that has that, because it makes compensating the preload for a passenger and luggage so much easier, and you can change the damping or the action of the suspension as you ride. Going on to the brakes of the 800GS, you have dual 305mm disc brakes. They have 2 piston Brembo calipers. The rear is a single piston Brembo with a 265mm disc. Now, the bike does have a IMU, or inertial measurement unit, so you do get cornering ABS, which is very, very nice. Tire sizes and wheels, you can see here this is smaller than the 900GS, just like the 700GS and then the 750GS have been. So you get in the front, it's a 110/80 19-inch, and in the back it's a 150/70 17. Now, as you can see, you have cast aluminum wheels as opposed to the spoke wheels you get on a 900GS, or that you used to get on the F850GS. Electronics on this bike, quite a bit. You get the 6-axis IMU I mentioned, cornering ABS, cornering traction control. You get cruise control, which is optional, riding modes, which are optional. You get phone connectivity through the TFT dash, you get tire pressure monitoring system, and I could go on, but being a BMW and having the premium package, you get quite a bit of stuff. All right, ergonomic seat height, riding position on the 800GS. Now, before I get into the details of this bike, just a couple notes. Trying to clarify and get this message out there, you know, in my videos, but some people confuse, you know, ground clearance versus suspension travel versus seat height versus leg room. So here's how this generally breaks down, right? If you put a lower seat on a motorcycle, it does 2 things. Putting a lower seat on will give you less distance between the seat and the ground, making it easier to reach the ground. It will also give you less distance between your seat and the foot peg, making your riding position more cramped and possibly making your knees hurt, especially if you're taller. Now, if you lower the suspension and leave the seat alone, lowering the suspension, whether you go up or down, that changes the height between the seat and the ground, but not the height between the seat and the foot peg. So some people get this mixed up, and it's important to understand the differences. Now, on the 800GS, the standard seat height is 32 inches or 815mm, which is low for an adventure bike, and they do that because it's got a lower suspension than something like the 900GS. Now, if you get the low suspension version of the bike, that does 2 things from the factory. It drops some height out of the suspension, and automatically then you get the OEM low seat, and that bike will have a seat height of 30 inches or 760mm. Okay, now this bike, adding a third thing to that, it's got the low suspension package, but it also has the extra low seat, which drops out about another almost half an inch or a little bit from the already low seat. So this bike has a 29.6 inch or 750mm seat height, which is very, very low for an adventure bike. In fact, I don't recall reviewing any adventure bikes with seat heights below that 30-inch mark. So if you're a shorter rider, this might be a very, very good option to look at. And I like that BMW is saying, hey, not everybody is super tall, and people need these shorter options. And I applaud BMW for doing that. So I'm 5'10" or 1.78 meters, 178 centimeters. I have a 32-inch inseam. So I'm a little bit too big for how this bike is set up, but I'll show you how it works. So you can see how low this is to the ground. I mean, for me, I've got like, if I stand up, I'm like 6 inches above the seat. Like it's so easy to reach the ground. And what that means is that the bike feels smaller and it feels lighter, and it's just super easy. It doesn't feel intimidating because the darn thing is so low. In terms of the riding position, like for me, the seat is too low. Number one, I feel like I'm sitting on the frame of the bike. There's like almost no padding in the seat. you know, and that's the compromise with these super low scooped out seats. And then you look at the legroom, like on most bikes, I would have a bit more like that. But here, because my seat is so low, I just feel kind of cramped up in my leg for an adventure bike. But again, this is not aimed at me. This is aimed at somebody a bit shorter. However, if I put the tall seat or the regular seat or even the rally seat on this bike, it would be great for me. So you have the options, but this is how it looks in my case. All right, let's take a tour of the features of this bike. Let's start with the lighting. You can see the high and low beam LED in the front right here. And then you've got LED turn signals as well. And you do get hazard flashers, which I have on, which are very nice to have. You can see the rear taillight is also LED. If you see flickering on the camera, that's because of the refresh rate of the LED lights with the refresh rate of the camera. It just doesn't work out. So they don't actually flicker in real life. Continuing the tour from the front, you can see the bike. We talked about the chassis, wheels, and tires and stuff already. The conventional fork, which is looking a bit dated these days when you see that versus an upside down fork, but this is a price point bike. You get the upper beak, that fender there, the lighting we talked about. You get this very small non-adjustable windshield. I believe BMW does offer an adjustable windshield kit, which I would highly recommend getting, because I remember the 850GS had that, and I think the mechanism is pretty simple. And I would also get a taller windshield if it was me, but that's just me. Coming around to the side, you can see the side fairings, the way that they exit the exhaust here. Pretty large brake lever. It's very small foot pegs. These are not good for off-road whatsoever, so I would change those out if you're going to be doing any off-road riding. Passenger foot pegs, which are much larger than the rider foot pegs for some reason. And you get these bolt-on passenger pegs here to the subframe, which is pretty nice. You can see there's some luggage mounts here for BMW Vario luggage, which actually I do have for this bike. They're just sitting in the garage, but this is not a video about Vario bags, but you can get that, and it has those integrated luggage. Very large exhaust can, you can see there. You can see the rear tire, rear braking setup. I like how you get this grab handle all the way around and this rack for cargo. It's really nice to have this, because so many motorcycles, especially at this price level, they will just not give you a rear rack. And that's really sad when you need to go and actually attach anything, or your passenger wants a place to hold on. It's really nice to have that. Rear number plate coming around. You can see chain drive, not much else here. The shifter, the quick shifter mechanism, and some coolant hoses. The fuel tank does have, yeah, the keyless on here. That's what you get with BMW. This is a GPS mount that you can get different GPS mounts from BMW, or navigator mounts if that's something you want. By the way, don't ride with the key like this and this lock. It could fall out, and that's a very, very bad day if you have that happen. Coming up to the controls, you have the typical BMW mirrors, which work well. You've got a cruise control setting that works there. Menu, turn off traction control, turn signals, horn. You've got the Wonder Wheel, which is to control things in the computer. Adjustable levers for the clutch and brake. I like to see that. A dedicated button for heated grips, a dedicated riding mode button, start stop, SOS button with a little safety cover like that. I think there should be a missile launch button. I think that would be much better, but BMW doesn't want to do that for some reason. Hand guards, which are, you know, more of a splash guard or a wind guard. They're not going to protect the bike in case of like a serious fall. You've got two power outlets up here. You've got this powerlet kind of style outlet, and then you do have a USB, and that is, I believe, a USB-C. Correction, I took a look at that. That's actually a USB-A port. Some of the newer bikes are switching over to USB-C, so it's kind of hard to keep track of all that. Let's turn the ignition on, show you the TFT dash. It's the TFT that we've come to know and love from BMW. You get this nice little splash green GS. So if I scroll through things with my menu button here, up at the top, I can see my fuel, my odometer, my trip computers. You can configure also what you see up here when you scroll through. Tire pressures. This bike does have tire pressure monitoring, range to empty, and so forth. If I go into the menu system here, I can go into the settings of the bike. I can change the vehicle settings. You can pre-select the riding modes. However, this bike only has 4 riding modes. It doesn't have Enduro Pro or Dynamic Pro, which is kind of strange and kind of disappointing, but I guess that's how they're differentiating these models. So you just pre-select all 4, and that's what you can then select via the mode button while you're riding. If we go into, you know, I'm not going to go through all this, but you get the idea. These are your settings. And then if I go over here to my vehicle and I go into that, you can see the temperatures, the voltage, tire pressures, trip computer stuff. It's pretty comprehensive, and I like how BMW presents all this information. It gives you also the tire pressures that you should be at, which is a nice thing to see. So if I press my mode button here, I will cycle through road, dynamic, enduro, and rain, and you just close the throttle and you can change that while you're riding. I've got the heated grip button. If I turn that on, you can see my heated grips coming up here on the bottom. So that's nice to have. And I think that's about a wrap on the tour. All right, it's everyone's favorite passenger test. So thank you, Maggie, for volunteering again for this bike. I know you just got off a Goldwing, so this is not going to be quite as nice as that, but we want to show the accommodations of the 800GS. So look at her leg position here. She looks like she has a good amount of leg room. How does the leg room feel and the foot pegs?
Okay, what is this thing called?
Well, this is just a guard for your foot, for your leg, so your leg doesn't go towards the exhaust.
Oh!
Yeah, that's so your leg doesn't hit the hot exhaust pipe.
This is so cool.
Well, they have to have that. But how does the seating position feel, the seat and the grab rails for your hands and everything?
I mean, this is nice. I can still have enough room to sit, and there's something for me to hold on to. So this is still nice. But of course, not as nice as the Goldwing. The Goldwing, you feel like you're sitting on clouds.
Yeah, but you could ride for a short distance. Okay, let me put the...
Right. It's nice to be in level.
Actually...
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like there's enough room for both of us.
Oh yeah, like...
It seems like you're kind of high back there. Like you're high up.
And I almost accidentally sit on the luggage rack.
I think because this bike has a really low seat for the driver, it makes you seem kind of high by comparison.
Okay.
Yeah, and then put your arms around me, see how that would be, because some people like to do that.
No, I will hold on to you.
So you have enough room.
Yes.
Yeah, this seems doable, but I don't think you'd be comfortable for more than an hour or two, honestly. I think you'd be okay for a shorter ride.
But this is BMW, though. This is so cool.
Yeah, but it's not a fancy BMW. It's not one of the real nice ones.
Still nice.
It's one of the more budget ones, but it's shorter for me. It is designed for shorter riders because see how low it is to the ground for me to reach? It's designed for shorter riders. Okay, well, thanks for doing the passenger test. We appreciate it. All right, riding the 800GS on the highway. First thing you notice is because this bike has this really, really tiny windshield, you get full wind blast on your body, which is actually really nice right now because it's summertime. In the winter, I think you would freeze to death and you probably want to fit a larger windshield, or if you're doing touring. But overall, cruising this bike on the highway here at 70 miles an hour, there's very little vibration. The motor feels pretty relaxed. Feels like the gearing's pretty tall. The riding position's comfortable. I've got cruise control. I've got some nice amenities like heated grips and things like that. Handlebars feel good. I've got these hand guards. It's really not a bad place to be. And I find myself speeding pretty easily on this bike because the engine just feels like it's got pretty tall gearing. I'm not sure if it's taller than the off-road oriented 900GS, but it sure feels that way. But overall, on the highway, I'm pretty happy with this. Pretty comfortable. I like the TFT dash. I can set my cruise control here very easily. It shows me what speed I've set. I've got riding modes. The mirrors are pretty clear. Once you get, I've tested this bike, you know, once you get above like 75 or 80 miles an hour, things start to get a little bit more buzzy. The mirrors start to blur a little bit. The engine's working a little bit more, but it's still basically a 900cc engine, so it does a pretty good job, even at 80 miles an hour. But beyond like 80 miles an hour, it starts to feel pretty windy, pretty busy through the engine, and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's put this 800GS on the canyon road here to do some sport testing, the handling, the acceleration, the brakes, all that kind of stuff. Come on, push it. Okay, so let me tell you what I'm feeling. The bike feels actually pretty fast, pretty punchy, considered it's the detuned version of the engine. It's still almost 90 horsepower, pretty quick. The quick shifter feels very nice. Very smooth, very buttery quick shifter. The engine is sporty, it likes to rev out. So the engine's good. The handling, it's I would say predictable and gentle. It's not super fast to steer, so it doesn't steer in super fast. It's a bit more gentle, a bit more like, oh, are you sure you want to do that? But I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's got a 27-degree suspension rake, so it's pretty relaxed, which I like for an adventure bike. I think that's a good choice. So it takes a little bit of effort to get it into the turn, but it's okay, and it sticks well, it holds the line well. I mean, I'm going uphill in the mountains. I can easily get up to 90 or 100 on this. Very confidence-inspiring bike to ride, just like you would expect from BMW. Very composed, even sort of towards the limit of its capability. The brakes, my initial feeling, yeah! The brakes are okay. They're just okay. We'll test them up here in a second, but they're okay, not great. Okay, let's do some 0 to 70 mile an hour to 0 acceleration and braking test. Okay, I would say that's pretty good. Pretty good for a bike at this price level. Nice acceleration. I did feel the traction control cutting power, which you expect. I've got a little gravel on the road, keeps you nice and safe. Love having traction control. The brakes are good enough. They're not amazing, but they're good enough. Just squeeze them all the way. You got ABS and you can stop. You should practice this, by the way, this threshold braking. It's really good thing to practice. Let's do it one more time. Okay, that time I went to 80, full panic stop. Let's see. Okay, ooh, brakes are very hot now. Ooh boy, better start riding to cool them down. Yeah, I smoked the brakes there. Brakes have smoke, but don't worry, motorcycle is not on fire, just a little bit of smoke. That's what we do. We got to test it. So one stop from 70, one stop from 80. It is a very hot day, almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so that is considered very extreme use. So don't take the bike to a track day, but it's not meant for that. But I like to see when the brakes start to smoke and overheat, because that's a good way to test the bike. They're not amazing brakes, but they're good enough. I'm really impressed with the acceleration though. It's very torquey, very good. Let my brakes really cool down there. Sorry officer, I had to speed because my brakes were on fire and I needed to prevent my brakes from catching fire, so I had to speed. That's a good excuse.
All right, let's do the famous drop and lift test on this bike. Now, a couple things. It's not my bike, so I gotta be nice. I'm doing it on dirt, on soft dirt, so that helps. This bike has no protection from the factory, so no handguards, no crash bars of any kind, so we're gonna be super gentle with this. As you can see, it falls, fairly flat as you would expect. It's not a boxer engine, so you don't get that advantage. But it's not too bad. Of course, I've got the handlebar straight. If you had the handlebar turned, you would fall even more flat because right now it's resting on the end of the handlebar. So let's gently lift it up. That was good. I was able to lift with my legs this time instead of my back. You know what? It really wasn't bad. I know I didn't have it all the way flat, but I don't know why, it feels a lot easier than I expected for a bike that weighs 500 pounds. It doesn't feel like it. I've lifted much lighter bikes that are heavier to lift, so I don't know. I guess maybe it's a low center of gravity, and that wasn't too bad at all. I think it's pretty manageable.
Okay, let's do some off-road tests on the 800GS. With the smaller wheels, the reduced suspension travel, lower ground clearance, you know, different suspension design. This is really not obviously intended for any sort of hardcore high-speed off-roading, just mild, moderate, gentle dirt roads and things like that. Whoa, and things like that. Sorry, that's some sand here, so I almost fell over. So let's see how we get along with this off-road. Now, on the electronics, we do have Enduro mode, so I can go into Enduro mode. There's no Enduro Pro mode in this bike, which is interesting, and I don't know if you can get that from BMW. I'm not sure. I'll put that in the text below, but I don't think that you can. I don't think that you can. The Enduro mode, what that does is it lessens the traction control, and it turns the ABS into more of an off-road kind of setup, but it leaves the ABS on to both wheels. Now, strangely, there's no way that I've found to turn the rear ABS off on this bike. I suppose that makes sense for how this bike's going to be used, because it's really not an off-road, you know, bike, I guess, to be honest. But I would like to see a way to turn off the rear ABS. Maybe there is, but I haven't found it. They do give you a hard button here to turn off traction control entirely, and then that will light up here as traction control off, but there's no way to turn off the rear ABS, which is kind of disappointing. All right, let's go for a ride in Enduro mode. So the Enduro mode allows for some wheel slippage, more than you would get in the road riding modes. Coming to our first bumps here, I found that riding this bike, you really have to take it very easy through any sort of bumps in the road or rocks, because the suspension just can't handle much abuse before it bottoms out very, very dramatically. So you don't want to do that with hard parts hitting each other and or bending rims and things like that, so beware of that. Standing up, the position feels actually quite okay for standing up, pretty natural and neutral for standing. I actually have really no issue with that. The foot pegs I would have to change those for sure. Now that I start to get into the rough part of the road, the ride, if you just keep it nice and slow, I'm going about 20 miles an hour. It's okay. Just go at a moderate pace. Don't hit anything, right? And you could take almost any bike off-road if you go slow enough. This bike is fine. You just have to ride at about this kind of pace. Going through the rocks and the ruts, it's okay. It's okay. But if you want to ride faster, you will hit the limits of the suspension very, very fast. And I'm not going to show you that because I don't want to damage the bike. But if I start to ride a little bit faster, and if I hit anything, yeah, ow! Now, of course, you should be standing up to do that, but I'm just showing you to make a point. You know, the suspension travel, especially because this is the low version of the bike, that's another point. This being the low version has a little bit less travel, which makes matters even worse. But on the other hand, if you're short, you can reach the ground, and that'll probably prevent more crashes, because you can reach the ground than crashes it would cause by being shorter suspension travel. So I think that's a good trade-off for most people who are of average height. I can feel the, whoa, when the front suspension bottoms, it's not a good feeling. When the front fork bottoms, it's like a metal on metal kind of a feel. You know what, actually the Enduro traction control is pretty effective for this bike, again with street kind of tires. See, if I open the whoa, don't do that. If I open the throttle, it actually drives forward pretty well. Even in the dirt now, in sand or mud, it's going to be too limiting and you'll have to turn it off. Let's try to see how the ABS works here. Okay, that's full. I mean, you can stop. Now, if you go down like a super steep, hill, you know, with loose gravel or rocks, that ABS could be pretty sketchy and pretty scary, I think, and I would like to be able to turn it off. But for roads like this, the ABS works fine in enduro mode, and it'll actually stop you pretty effectively. You just learn. If you've been riding dirt bikes, you have to relearn, because jam the brake all the way. I know it doesn't seem like good technique, but on these ABS bikes, that's what you kind of have to do. Turning the bike around, maneuvering, stuff like that, you know, it's being low to the ground really helps with that. It just feels like a pretty small, compact, low to the ground bike, which it is. And I think if you're a smaller person, you're going to really appreciate this lower version, and especially with this lower seat. All right, let's jump into the summary of the pros and cons for the F800GS. So for me, the pros, number one, I really like the engine in this motorcycle. It sounds great, it has a lot of torque, it's got good power. It just feels like a big, punchy engine, and that's because it is. It's almost 900cc. Next up for me is, with this bike, you get a good 3-year warranty from BMW. You also get the typically higher than average dealership experience with BMW dealers. At least that's been my experience. And you get some really good creative financing options from BMW. Another pro for me on this bike is you get BMW's very excellent TFT dash. That's one of the premium components on this bike that I do think helps justify some of the price difference between this and some of the lower price competitors. Another pro for me is you get BMW's optional electronic ESA rear suspension. Again, kind of a premium feature that you're not really seeing on other bikes in this $10,000 to $13,000 price range. Another pro for this is the optional factory lowering and the optional low seat, which this bike does have. And we've talked about this. A lot of other manufacturers don't think to offer this kind of stuff, and this really does help set this apart and make it more short rider friendly. Yes, other bikes you can get low seats, but how many bikes offer factory suspension lowering? That's a really nice thing to have. Another pro to this bike, I think, is you have the option of getting some premium features, like tire pressure monitoring, like cruise control. We've mentioned the optional electronic rear suspension, the TFT dash, and again, it just helps maybe justify some of that higher price. What are the downsides to the F800GS? Well, number one, I do think that they could have done a little bit more with the update from the 750GS. It really just feels like they put on some different paint, tweaked a couple tiny things, and then gave us a slightly larger engine capacity. I do welcome the increased power and torque. It's nice, it's noticeable, but again, I think they could do more to differentiate this bike from the competition and just give a little bit more for the money. Another downside for me is the suspension. As you saw in the off-road part, it's pretty limited for off-roading. It bottoms out very quickly, very easily, and when it does, it's a very like hard metal on metal kind of a feeling. The other downside for me is, especially if you don't get the ESA, is very limited suspension adjustment. No adjustments on the front suspension at all. The rear, you do get rebound and preload, but I'd like to see more adjustability there from a bike at this price point. Next up for me, I think this bike struggles with value compared to its rivals. You know, you saw that well, you are going to see that, sorry, in the competition segment. I do think that that's an area where this really struggles to compete. Another downside, it's very strange that they don't give you the option to turn off at least the rear wheel ABS. I'm kind of perplexed by that decision, and I'm not sure why that's the case. Another downside is that it would be nice to have an adjustable windshield. I've seen bikes in this range on this platform have the adjustable windshield. I think the 850GS has had it and things like that, and it just seems like they kind of cheaped out by taking that mechanism off, and that would be a very nice thing to have. All right, let's talk about the competition for the F800GS. This is going to be a tough discussion when it comes to this bike, I think. Now, yes, when you buy a BMW, you are paying a little bit more for the badge. You do get a better warranty. Typically, the dealerships are better. You get some nice extra features and components that we've talked about. But I do think, and I'll put this chart here up on the screen, that this bike does struggle a bit when you really come down to the componentry, the features, the power, the weight, and the performance and everything for the price tag compared to the rivals. So you've got the Transalp 750, the V-Strom 800. Now,
let me break this down again into, like, some of these bikes on this list have a 21-inch front wheel, some have a 19. So the 19-inch bikes are the 800GS, the V-Strom 800, and the Tiger 850 Sport. Okay, the other ones have a 21-inch front wheel. Typically, you're going to see higher seat heights, they're going to be more off-road friendly, maybe a little bit more suspension travel. So it kind of depends. Do you want more of a road-oriented adventure bike, which would be like your V-Strom 800? By the way, not the 800DE, the regular V-Strom 800, which is a cast wheels 19-inch, just set up just like this bike. Tiger 850 Sport, again, is more road-oriented in the middleweight adventure category. The more off-road oriented ones on this list are going to be your Tenere, your Transalp, and your KTM 790 Adventure. So again, you can parse this however you want. This is on the screen for you to look at. But when you look at the price point, the power, the weight, the BMW, how does the BMW stand out? I think that the optional lower suspension and the lower seats can make it help stand out. I think the warranty helps make it stand out. I think some of the premium features like optional electronic suspension, the cruise control, the nice TFT dash, things like that, those things help make it stand out. But where it falls down, I think, is sort of power and weight and price compared to some of the competitors out there. The best bike for you in this category is simply going to be, what are you going to do with the bike? Again, I think if you're a shorter rider, then you're going to be looking at the lower seat options, the bikes that give you that. If you're more touring oriented, you're probably looking more at the V-Strom, maybe more at the Tiger, maybe more at this. And there's other options out there if you're willing to look at things maybe outside of the adventure category, going into like standard bikes. If you want more of an off-road direction with your middleweight adventure bike, then I think you should be looking at the Tenere, the KTM 790. You could look at the V-Strom 800DE, the one with the 21-inch wheel, the Transalp. That brings me to the Transalp. Man, I gotta tell you, the 2025 Transalp, I'm reviewing it here in a couple weeks. It's got updated, better suspensions, a few other tweaks, new colorways in the US. It's $99.99. That is a phenomenal motorcycle for the money. Just, I don't think you can beat the Transalp right now in terms of value as an adventure bike. So let me know what you think. Which one would you buy? But I think that's a summary of the competition for the 800GS.
All right, riding the F800GS at nighttime. Let's power up this beast and see what we have here. So as you can see, you don't have any backlit switches, which is disappointing. And BMW has chosen also not to give you backlit switches, even on their very highest end model, sometimes costing over $30,000. So I really wish they would add that. It'd be very nice to be able to see, you know, the difference between my cruise control, my heated grips, my riding mode, my suspension setting, menu, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So here's the TFT at night. It looks great, just as you would expect. Of course, the brightness adjusts depending on the lighting condition. So now all we have to do is go for a ride and test the headlight performance. You can see our low beam here and then our high beam there. Sitting in the driveway, what I found is that the light will look good in the driveway, but then when you get out on the road, it doesn't look nearly as good. I don't know why it is that way, but that seems to be how it is. Alright, so riding it on the highway, I'm actually pretty impressed with the spread of light from the low beam. It really goes out pretty good on the sides. Of course, I just can't see very far in the distance. Now, when I flip on my high beam, that situation gets a lot better. And I have actually pretty impressive lights for, I guess, what is one of BMW's more budget models. Being a BMW, it's got some pretty good headlights in it. I'd say it's above average for a motorcycle. Okay, getting on the twisty road here at nighttime on the 800GS. It has the typical motorcycle problem where when I tip into the corner, as you can see there, I really can't see what the hell is going on up ahead because the cutoff is so sharp. Now if I turn on my high beam, it's still quite a bit, it's better, but it's still not great. So let's throw it into these corners here. Yeah, see, that's a bit scary. I can't really see what's going on when it's tipped over. Now that's a common issue with most motorcycles at night. Obviously at this price point you're not going to get anything like adaptive lighting or anything crazy like that. I would still say that this is above average for a modern motorcycle, but it's still not great. And if you're going to ride a lot at night on this bike, I'd recommend looking into some sort of aftermarket high output auxiliary lights for sure. Final thoughts on BMW's F800GS. So this is, a little bit of a challenge of a bike to review, I think, because it kind of sits in an interesting place with its price point and its features, and it does struggle a little bit compared to sort of value compared to its rivals. But I will say this, BMW has been historically, and I think still is, rather successful with models like this because they have great options for shorter riders with a low suspension and a low seat. They have a great warranty. They typically have a more premium dealer experience. You get the badge of the BMW, and the bike is fun to ride, and it has a great engine and a lot of nice features that are a little bit more up-spec than some of the competition. So this is a great bike. You should check it out. But again, when you're shopping for stuff like this, you should really look at your different options in the category to make sure they're making the best decision for you. If you find this kind of review helpful and informative, I'd appreciate it if you'd support Big Rock Moto. There's ways to do that down below. Please give the video a thumbs up. Please leave a comment. Please subscribe. Use the affiliate links. Join Patreon if you feel like it. I really appreciate that. Helps this channel go forward. Beyond that, thanks for watching. Ride safe. I'll see you out there.